Dalton Riggs had maybe 3 minutes before his body gave out completely. 3 minutes of consciousness while they worked on him with instruments colder than ice, drilling into vertebrae, draining blood into containers that glowed faintly in the beam. He couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only count down the seconds and think about his girlfriend waiting back in Columbus, who would never know what really happened in these Georgia woods. Welcome to Lady E's Dark Tales. I'm Mr. Gray, and tonight we're examining 3 military encounters with my distant relatives, shall we say. 3 service members, 3 bases, 3 different approaches to making inconvenient cosmic truths disappear. Because when soldiers start reporting beings with large black eyes conducting medical procedures during routine training exercises, well, the institutional response gets creative. They told the Riggs family it was a training accident, just another casualty of routine night maneuvers. But that's not what happened in those Georgia woods. Not even close. Specialist Dalton Riggs had been restless that night, boots scuffing the dirt as his squad spread through the tree line. March 25th, 2003, 5 days into the Iraq War. His mind carried echoes of Baghdad burning on TV screens and Linkin Park's new album rattling inside his Discman hours earlier. 23 years old, wiry frame, scar above his brow from a childhood that taught him to keep asking why. He thought the woods were familiar ground. He thought the army had prepared him for anything. The truth? No drill sergeant, no Clancy novel, no PT run could have prepared him for what came. It began with the light. Too bright, too sudden for flares. Riggs froze, senses flooding with certainty he wished he didn't have. The paralysis came like a switch flipped in his nervous system. He knew the stories, every X-Files rerun, every late-night forum thread, every terrified account of fire in the sky. He'd studied them like puzzles, preparing for something he never believed would come. And now it had. The eyes emerged from the radiance, oversized, black, glossy, reflecting his horror back at him. That's when things got cosmically interesting. The Greys moved in tight formation, their movements synchronized, clicking like cicadas in unison. Worker drones, no emotion, no hesitation. To them, Dalton wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a man with a girlfriend in Columbus and a plan to propose after promotion. He was a specimen, a data point, something to be processed with the same care you'd give to dismantling an engine or scanning a barcode. And processed he was. Paralysis held while their elongated fingers handled instruments colder than ice. So cold, they burned where metal touched skin. A drill pierced vertebrae as if opening a safe, and Dalton felt every rotation as it bored through bone into spinal cord. The pain was white-hot, blinding, but his body refused to convey the agony through movement or sound. He was trapped inside the torture, conscious of every sensation. Tubes snaked into veins with surgical precision, draining crimson into containers that glowed faintly under the beam. His blood illuminated from within like it was being analyzed in real time. Circular wounds carved from his arms and thighs like meat stripped from bone. Perfectly symmetrical, impossibly clean, and he could smell his own flesh burning where their instruments cauterized as they cut. They worked with mechanical speed, as though multiple procedures could happen simultaneously, because to them, time wasn't an obstacle. Dalton's body simply couldn't keep up. His vision started to dim at the edges, blood pressure dropping, organs beginning to shut down in sequence, first his extremities going numb and cold, then the creeping sensation of his core systems failing. He had maybe 3 minutes of consciousness left, maybe less. 3 minutes to experience his own systematic dismantling. Blood loss, organ trauma, system failure. 3 minutes of horror stretched into eternity in his awareness, while he counted down the seconds, desperately holding on to thoughts of Columbus, of his girlfriend, of any fragment of humanity they couldn't extract with their glowing vials and drilling instruments. He thought of his stepfather's fists, the scar above his brow, the night he swore he'd never be powerless again. And yet, here he was, body locked, mind screaming, stripped of all choice. His final thought wasn't prayer, wasn't defiance. It was bitter recognition. I was right all along. Folks, you've probably seen this scenario before in stories, but Dalton didn't get the Hollywood ending. No miraculous escape, no half-remembered nightmare brushed aside by daylight. Just silence. Just the lifeless body found at dawn, 400 yards off course, mutilated with precision, no earthly training accident could explain. The Army called it just that, an accident. Closed casket, full honors, classified file. His squad whispered about the marks until military police told them to forget. His girlfriend cried at the funeral and got married 2 years later. Official history absorbed Dalton Riggs into a wall of names, his true death hidden in the footnotes of secrecy. Because it's so much easier to assume training accidents happen than to admit something else is hunting soldiers in the dark. And that, friends, is the kind of denial that keeps the cosmic joke running. Well, Fort Benning chose the simplest solution. When the specimen doesn't survive, you just file it under training accident and move on. Clean. Final. No witnesses to manage because dead men tell no tales, as you humans say. But that approach only works when the encounter is fatal. When someone survives, well, that's where things get institutionally complicated. The bureaucratic machinery has to work harder. Careers get weaponized. Psychiatric evaluations become tools of silence. Mr. Slate, you've seen how the system handles living witnesses better than I have. Why don't you walk everyone through what happens when a service member survives long enough to file a report?
Fair enough, Gray. I've reviewed enough incident reports and filed enough paperwork on these situations to recognize the playbook. When someone makes it out alive and starts talking, the response gets more creative than simple accident classification. Our next case demonstrates exactly that. Takes us overseas to Ramstein Air Base, Germany, August 2019. Technical Sergeant Bonnie Thibodeau, 18 years of exemplary service, top-tier intelligence analyst, security clearance so deep it required 3 background checks. She survived her encounter. But that's when her real problems began. Bonnie had lived most of her life in patterns. She broke enemy codes, dissected terrorist chatter, and pulled meaning from noise. She saw connections where others saw chaos. And in August 2019, when she woke at 2:30 in the morning inside her Kaiserslautern apartment, paralyzed, she recognized the pattern instantly. The synchronized movement of figures around her bed. The clicking noise, not mechanical, not quite organic. Oversized black eyes reflecting her own terror. Every abduction documentary she'd half-mocked but secretly memorized poured through her brain like a checklist. Paralysis, coordination, grays, recognition arrived like a curse. That's when things got scary. The grays swarmed in unison, no wasted motion. They weren't soldiers, weren't interrogators, weren't anything human. They were worker drones in the most literal sense, components of a hive, functioning as one machine. Fingers too thin to be strong, yet impossibly firm when 2 or 3 restrained a limb. Tubes, probes, and surgical instruments appeared from nowhere, cold metal tracing her skin. Her body was like an airframe, stripped for maintenance, tissue samples extracted in neat geometric patterns. She could feel each circular punch biopsy removing flesh in perfect symmetry, left arm then right arm, left thigh then right thigh, the pattern spreading across her skin like they were mapping her. Spinal fluid drawn like oil from a reservoir, and she felt the needle slide between vertebrae with impossible precision, felt the pressure change in her skull as they siphoned cerebral fluid. The sensation was nauseating, disorienting, like her brain was slowly deflating inside her skull. Reproductive sampling performed with disinterested efficiency. Cold instruments invading, extracting, cataloging parts of her she couldn't see, but could absolutely feel being removed and placed in containers that hummed with a frequency that made her teeth ache. The clicking between them grew faster, louder, like cicadas swelling toward fever pitch. They were communicating about her body, discussing findings, coordinating their systematic harvest. Bonnie's analytical mind cataloged every sensation even as it begged her to stop processing, each puncture site burning, each incision precise and bloodless. They were cauterizing as they cut. The smell of her own flesh searing filled her nostrils. She knew she was dying, or at least being dismantled. Her heart rate was spiking, crashing, spiking again as her body tried to compensate for the trauma. Blood pressure dropping. Shock setting in. Her vision tunneling to a pinpoint of consciousness that was fading fast. And yet, she lived. When the light snapped out and her body slumped back into her bed, she thought at first that she was dead. But breath rasped in her throat. Her clock read 3:47. Missing time. Wounds that shouldn't exist, sheets damp with blood. The pattern had completed, and she was still conscious to bear it. You've probably guessed what came next, because it's always easier for the system to call something stress than admit the cosmic alternative. When Bonnie reported the incident, the military machine swallowed her whole. The flight surgeon scribbled down hallucination, sleep paralysis, overwork as the official diagnosis. Puncture wounds became possible self-inflicted injuries in the medical record. Command suggested psychiatric counseling. Colleagues started with jokes. They told her to check for UFOs, but they quickly shifted to suspicion. A clearance review followed. Whisper campaigns spread. In a community where perception is survival, hers collapsed overnight. Folks, this is what cover-ups really look like. Not shadowy men with sunglasses and erased memories, but bureaucracy weaponized to grind down credibility until the truth is ash in your mouth. Bonnie transferred back stateside within months, her once respected analysis buried under the stigma of being that UFO lady. She learned fast. Silence was safer. She kept logs, encrypted, offline, photographed new marks that appeared in clusters on her skin, documented lights that hovered outside her San Antonio apartment window. Patterns continued. Missing hours stacked like classified files no one wanted to open. Her analytical drive never let her stop documenting. But she stopped talking. The cost was too high. And here's the cosmic punchline, friends. She knew exactly what was happening. Every circular wound, every unexplained scar was further proof. The recognition that had cursed her that night never left. She saw the puzzle clearly. The drones came back again and again, and she knew no report, no commander, no system could ever save her. Shocking, I know. Now she walks into Ramstein's intelligence vaults with her head high, badge still flashing, clearance still intact, because silence bought her survival. But behind locked doors in the quiet hours, she keeps the files growing with logs, photos, timelines, and other documentation. She knows one day she might go public, maybe after retirement. But until then, the lights outside her window keep returning. The clicks still echo in her ears when she wakes. The scars still form in geometric precision. And the silence, oh, silence, is the loudest sound of all. You see, people, that's the standard institutional response to living witnesses. Psychiatric dismissal, career destruction, bureaucratic isolation. Effective, efficient. And it keeps the paperwork contained to medical files nobody questions. Works great when the witness is alone and has no leverage. But sometimes the situation requires more direct intervention. Sometimes the witness has family. Sometimes they're too stubborn to accept the psychiatric narrative. That's when my former colleagues get personally involved. This one might be a little too close to home for me. Gray, you want to take us out with the final case?
With pleasure, Slate. Because this last encounter demonstrates something fascinating about human institutional behavior. When denial and dismissal fail, threats fill the gap quite nicely. Our final stop brings us to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, June 2017. Gunnery Sergeant Rochelle Castellanos, Marine Corps combat instruction, iron backbone, trained countless recruits, absolutely not the type to stay quiet about impossible experiences. At least, not until the Defense Intelligence Agency explained exactly what silence would cost her. Gunnery Sergeant Rochelle Castellanos thought she knew every corner of Camp Lejeune's training grounds. She had marched recruits through mud and darkness for years, barking cadence until their fear burned into muscle memory. But on June 15, 2017, the night exercise wasn't about land navigation. It was about something else entirely. She had been confident, as always, compass in hand, her boots cutting across pine needles and soft Carolina soil. At 41, she was the iron backbone of Marine Corps combat instruction. Disciplined, compact, and untouchable. She'd pushed countless young Marines past their breaking points, reminding them that fear could be managed. That night, she had no idea fear would become something she couldn't control. It began with silence. Not the natural kind, not the hush of forest after sundown. This was different. Radios cut out, no cicadas, no frogs, just a void. Then came the light, blinding, white, descending through the trees in a column so bright it erased shadows. Rochelle's body locked instantly, as though her nervous system had been yanked by an invisible switch. That's when things got cosmically interesting. The figures emerged through the beam. Small, thin, 3 or 4 feet tall. Enormous black eyes fixed on her as they advanced in eerie synchronization. Their clicking language rattled like teeth in the cold. Worker drones, gray variety. To them, she wasn't an instructor, wasn't a mother, wasn't even human in any way that mattered. She was a specimen. Recognition came sharp and brutal. Her younger brother Manny had obsessed over alien stories, forced her to watch Fire in the Sky and Communion. She had laughed it off back then, teased him for his paranoia. But now, locked in the beam, she knew. Manny had been right all along. The paralysis, the eyes, the examination. This was it. Her mind screamed commands her body couldn't obey. Years of combat training. Worthless. The paralysis left her standing helpless as long, spindly fingers clamped to her arms and legs with startling strength. Their grip was firm, but somehow didn't leave marks, like they knew exactly how much pressure to apply to hold her, without damaging the specimen. Instruments materialized from nowhere. Cold tips pressed against her skin, cutting precise circles into flesh. She could feel the blade rotate as it bored Nun, feel the pop as it punched through dermis into subcutaneous tissue. Blood welled, vanishing into vials that appeared in their thin hands. The suction was immediate, mechanical, draining her faster than her body could compensate. Needles slid into her spine between L4 and L5 with surgical accuracy. Whoever they were, they knew human anatomy better than any medic she'd ever trained with. She felt the hollow needle penetrate, felt the draw as they extracted spinal fluid. The pressure in her skull shifted, dropped, and nausea hit her in waves. Tubes siphoned samples from puncture sites across her body. Arms, thighs, abdomen. The Greys worked with terrifying efficiency, moving like surgeons who didn't need to speak. One would cut, while 2 others positioned collection instruments. They were so synchronized it was like watching a single organism with multiple limbs. She felt every incision, every extraction, unable to thrash or scream. Her mind cataloged the sensations like a horror ledger. Punctures along the arms burning like acid, symmetrical circles carved into her thighs, 8 on each leg, precise as bullet holes. The sickening pressure of something probing deeper into her abdomen. Something cold and rigid, sliding past her abdominal wall, moving between organs, taking samples of tissue she didn't even know could be accessed without surgery. She thought of her daughter Sophia, and the promise she'd made to always come home. That promise meant nothing to the Greys. She was just biological material, just data to be collected and catalogued, and then it was over. The light blinked out. Rochelle collapsed into mud, body drenched in sweat and blood. Hours later, she woke in sickbay with a neat story stamped onto her records. Heat exhaustion during training. Scoop marks became abrasions in the medical file. Nosebleeds became minor epistaxis. Official paperwork already sealed her silence. But silence didn't stop there. 3 days later, 2 men in dark suits appeared at her quarters. They claimed to be from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Credentials waved, photos snapped of her living space. One of them smiled without warmth and told her that for her daughter's sake, she would accept the medical explanation as fact. They knew Sophia's school, her pickup schedule, her routines. And just like that, Rochelle understood the rules. This wasn't just about Greys. Humans were in on it too. Folks, you've probably seen this play before. It isn't Men in Black erasing memories with shiny gadgets. It's intimidation, bureaucracy, and threats so subtle you don't dare resist. Rochelle stayed silent. She made Master Sergeant, just like they hinted she would if she kept her mouth shut. But paranoia never left. Black SUVs appeared outside Sophia's school. Strange static haunted her phone. Emails to UFO researchers bounced back with cryptic errors. She saw other Marines with the same strange scars, the same haunted eyes. But conversations ended the second she asked questions, and the visits never stopped. New marks appeared every few months, mysterious wounds forming in geometric precision. Hours vanished from her memory. She woke in her bed, sore, shaking, and certain she had been taken again. Sophia once asked about the scars on her mother's arms. Rochelle called them training injuries. The lie tasted like ash, because it's so much easier to accept heat exhaustion than admit something hunts Marines in the night. And that, fellow travelers, is the cosmic joke. We salute the flag, we train for war, but sometimes the enemy doesn't come from across the ocean. Sometimes it comes from above the tree line. Well, from Specialist Riggs, who died with the truth in Georgia woods, to Sergeant Thibodeau, who survived into psychiatric exile in Germany, to Gunnery Sergeant Castellanos, who lives under surveillance at Camp Lejeune. 3 service members, 3 bases, 3 different silencing protocols.
Yes, death gets filed as training accidents. Survivors get psychiatric labels, and the stubborn ones get threats. The system adapts, and believe me, it always adapts.
The Greys keep coming, the military keeps covering up, and somewhere tonight, another soldier is watching lights descend over training grounds.
So tell us, have you ever served where strange lights appeared during night exercises? Seen scars on fellow service members that didn't match their official medical records? If so, drop your experiences in the comments below.
Well, that's where tonight's tales end. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because the unknown is always watching.
And if something like this ever happens to you, remember this. Sometimes silence costs less than speaking.
But staying silent, ooh, that might cost something too.